And what I'd like to do is take the next few minutes of your time and talk about a couple of main themes. The first one is be nice to everyone. And the second one is it's always a God thing. And I think when we get done with this, hopefully you'll see at least as how it relates to me that both of these things have been very critical in my life. I was very fortunate to be raised by a mother whose father built Indianapolis racers. And I think that probably my love of speed and racing is genetic. My grandfather built the winning 1918 Indianapolis car driven by Howdy Wilcox. For some of you may have heard of Wilbur Shaw, who was a very famous Indianapolis driver. My sister's named after his mother. So we had quite a relationship with the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And this is my mom and dad. And they were instrumental in teaching me about being nice to everyone, and it's always a God thing. And all of us also, I think, can look back at our lives and see some of the people who have been mentors in our life. And I've got a photo here of a gentleman named Charlie Tutt. Charles Tutt II was actually his name. And I would encourage you, if you would, to remember that name because it will come back in a number of the elements that we talk about as we go through today. And with all of that said, I'd like to talk a little bit about living the dream. I'd always wanted to be a race car driver. Like I said, I think it was probably genetic. But I was born and raised in Pulaski, Virginia, Pulaski High School, a very small town in the southwestern part of the state in Appalachia. We had about 8,000 people in the town. And at the end of my graduation from there, I went to a small Baptist school in Tennessee called Carson Newman. My parents were always very supportive. And so while I was going to Carson Newman, I was reading Hot Rod magazines and Road and Track. And in Hot Rod magazine, there was an article about a school called General Motors Institute. And they had a Firebirds Auto Club. And I thought, that's a place I'd like to go. So I applied to GMI. I went home one weekend and told my parents, I said, just so you know, I may not be at Carson Newman next year. I've applied at General Motors Institute. And they, of course, said, what's that and where is it? And I said, well, here's the article from the magazine about it. That's how all of you picked your colleges, right? That, and you could also get the Charles Atlas. No, it's a whole different story. So I was fortunate enough to be accepted at General Motors Institute. And as a matter of fact, right next to my picture of Charlie Tutt, you'll notice that there's my first day at school. And when you get a chance to look at the pictures, you'll notice that I'm standing looking quite debonair in a sport coat and tie in front of the General Motors Institute logo. Now, General Motors Institute is still around, only it's called Kettering today. But when I went to General Motors Institute, the way the system was set up was you had to be sponsored by some unit of General Motors, and you went to school 6 weeks, worked 6 weeks, went to school 6 weeks, and worked 6 weeks, and that was a semester. Now, that worked extremely well for me because when I was in the school system, I was studying sometimes. When I was in the work section, I was able to take a second job as a mechanic at Trio Motors, which was a Saab dealership in Flint, Michigan. Because I needed extra money because I was going to buy a race car. Well, a gentleman that worked there named David Birdsell said to me, how would you like to try rallying? And I said, rallying? Rallying? That's little guys in stroker caps with chihuahuas and counting pumpkins in a field, right? And he said, you don't understand. He said, this is European style rallying. And I said, well, what's that? He says, well, it's driving as fast as you can at 1 minute intervals on mountain and forest roads across the United States. And I said, really fast on real roads? And he said, yeah. I said, yeah, let's try that. So in rallying, there's two people in the car. There's the driver and the co-driver or navigator. And when Dave asked me to join him, I started out as a co-driver, as a navigator. So if you can picture this, January, Michigan. We start on our first winter rally. We're really going well. About two-thirds of the way through the rally, we miss a turn, we climb a snowbank, and run into a tree. So we're going to call this my first crash. That's Ann's nomenclature. I kind of like it. And so when you crash in a car, you're obviously worried about your driver or co-driver, depending on what seat you're sitting in. And David said to me, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Are you okay?" And he said, "Yeah." And then he said, "Well, what do you think of it now?" I said, "Man, I love this." So this is great stuff. So that began my love of rally. And this was, as Ann calls it, the reincarnation of the car after the first crash. Now, I was working at Trio Motors in Flint at the time, so I was fortunate enough to be able to have some sponsorship for that car, and obviously I was back in GMI, but I had been bitten by the rally racing bug. And so I continued to do that while I was going to school, and there was a gentleman named Bill Waddell, who was the Director of Services for General Motors Institute. So much like Larry was here, for all of GMI, anything that broke, needed work, etc., Bill was responsible for. So needless to say, for an engineering school with labs, that was a pretty highly placed position. And Bill was a racer as well. And Bill said, "How would you like to go do the Baja with me?" Now, I'm sure some of you have heard of the Baja 1000 in the Baja Peninsula, south of California. And I said, "Man, I'd love to, but with school and work, I don't think I can do that." And Bill said, "Well, let me talk to the Dean of Students and to your plant manager, and maybe we can work something out in the schedule." And I said, "Okay, well, I'd be willing to do that." So Bill talked to my plant manager. My plant manager was willing to work with the schedule. And then Bill talked with the Dean of Students, who happened to be Charlie Tutt. Charlie Tutt said, this was about my third semester at GMI. Charlie Tutt said, "I've been looking at your grades," and he said, "You're a pretty bad underachiever." "I've seen your test scores and I've seen your SATs," and he said, "You're not doing as well as you should at General Motors Institute." I said, "Well, sir, I apologize for that." He said, "Here's the deal." He said, "I've talked to Bill. I know how much you like racing. I'm going to change your schedule so you can do the event, but from here on out, I'm going to put you on academic probation, and you have to maintain a 90 or above average." And of course, he's getting the be nice to everyone here, and in the back of my mind, I got to say, who hosing me? So I got to do the race, and I did, in fact, go on academic probation and had to maintain a 90 average. So Bill and I load the car, our pre-run car, which was a Volkswagen Beetle, into a 40-foot enclosed trailer. We hooked that up to a 38-foot motorhome, and we take off for Baja. So we are in the Baja Peninsula. Everything's going well. And in the Baja, you can pre-run the course. You get a chance to see where the challenges are before you actually do the race. Now, I'd love to tell you that this was a short time ago, but it was before cell phones. And so we had gone down in the center portion of the Baja Peninsula to pre-run for a day. So we had our crew waiting for us, and we head off into the desert and up into the hills of the Baja Hills. And things are going well. And in the middle of the peninsula is a relatively well-known resort called Mike's Sky Ranch. Or for those who are of a Spanish bent, Mike's Sky Rancho. And so it happened to be one of the places on the course, so we stopped and had lunch. We finished our lunch, hop in our Volkswagen, and we take off down the roads to finish about 35 miles to get back to the crew to finish our pre-run. And it starts to rain a little bit. We don't think anything about it. A little bit of rain, desert, be nice. And it started to rain a little harder, and it started to rain a little harder, and it started to rain a little harder. And we're thinking, okay, well, we've only got about 30 miles to go. We should be okay. And so we go down through a wash that's about 50 yards long. We get about halfway through, and here comes an 8-foot wall of water. So Bill and I are sitting in our Volkswagen as the water's floating the car down the wash. So we've got two engineers in the car thinking, this probably isn't going to end well for us. No. So the car happens to come up and get lodged against a tree. So you've got two men crawling out the window in a Volkswagen Beetle to hang on to this tree. And I've got to admit, at that point, I'm not sure exactly what we were thinking, other than we probably wanted to be out of the car. Really? So as we're hanging onto the tree, we see the car start to go away. Oh, no. So here we are hanging in the tree in a pouring rainstorm, watching cars the size of rocks the size of small dogs run down this stream. And we're thinking, I wonder what's going to happen next. So it finally stopped raining, and we were able to get down out of the tree, soaked to the skin, and we're 3 miles from Mike's Sky Ranch. So here we go, 3 miles back to Mike's Sky Ranch. At Mike's Sky Ranch, they did happen to have a room for the night. We thought that was great. So now here's Bill and I in the room with our clothes, our dollar bills, our credit cards, everything laid out on the bed trying to dry things out. And this is one that Ann hasn't heard. One of the advantages to living at Mike's Sky Ranch is you're kind of at the whim of the owner. So Bill and I have got the heat cranked up. We're trying to get everything dry. Knock on the door about 9:30 in the evening. Yeah, just want to let you know, you won't have any lights for a while. Mike's getting ready to turn the generator off. He's got to go to bed early tonight because he's got to go into La Paz tomorrow. Okay, thanks. Have a nice evening. So we think, well, somehow or another we'll be able to get from Mike's Sky Ranch back to our crew, because remember, we left our crew at 9 o'clock the preceding morning. And they have no idea where we are or what's happened to us. So we get a knock on the door the next morning about 7 o'clock. Who is it? And in broken Spanish, they said, "We have your car." And we thought, what? And sure enough, we walk out, and here's our Volkswagen Beetle sitting behind the back of an old Mexican pickup truck. And we thought, oh, well, it's air-cooled, so we didn't have to worry about the radiator or the antifreeze. So we said, well, maybe it'll run. But we probably ought to do an oil change in case water got in the engine. So we did an oil change. It started. We thought that's pretty good. We said to Mike, have you got some more oil? Can we get 4 more quarts? And he said, yeah. Now remember, this was a number of years ago, and he was charging us $1.50 a quart for the oil. Right. Mike did understand profit. Yeah. So we did 1 more oil change. The thing fired up. We thought, we're good to go. This is great. And this, by the way, is the car that we were pre-running for. That's our Baja car. So we think, no problem. We're about 30 miles from the crew. We jump in the car. We're going down the dirt roads, the desert roads. We finally get to one of the a little larger roads, and we notice that the temperature gauge isn't working. And we thought, well, that's a little weird. And about 2 minutes after we noticed the temperature gauge wasn't working, the engine seized. And we realized the reason the temperature gauge wasn't working was the engine had gotten hot enough that the sender had fallen off. So here we are sitting beside a dirt road about 20 miles from our crew in the desert in Mexico with no idea how we're going to get down the road. And this is a God thing, and as God is my witness, if you were making an archetypal chicken truck for Mexico, a flatbed with chicken coops on the back and 2 guys sitting in the cab, that's what came by. We didn't speak Spanish, they didn't speak English, but we knew Pemex. That's the Mexican gas company. We had the Pemex. Oh, andale. So for the next 20 miles, I sat in the back of the archetypal Mexican chicken truck. And we got to our team, and of course we went back and got the car. We obviously had a very successful run. But those are some of the experiences that you remember when you think about your career. And of course, I came back to General Motors Institute, and we graduated. And kind of as you can see, I'd been bitten by the bug I was a GMI grad, and our class motto, because I graduated in 1975. Does anyone remember what happened in 1975?
That was Fitzgerald.
Well, yeah. I've got to be honest with you, Marcy. My class didn't have anything to do with that.
I know, that's the one thing I remember.
It was the first energy crisis.
Yeah. Oh.
Gas lines, auto sales were in the dumpster. So for the first time in the history of General Motors Institute, members of our graduating class were laid off. Oh. So our class slogan was all dressed up and no place to work.
Oh, no.
Well, as you can see, Chrysler to the rescue. Now remember, as I was going to GMI, I'd been working in a car dealership, so I'd learned about sales and service and parts. And Chrysler had an opportunity as a parts and service district manager in Northern California. Now there's 2 or 3 things that are cool about this. One is my brother lived in California and I loved California. The second one was that it was a hotbed of rallying. There were a lot of rallies done in California and also desert racing. So I thought, man, this is a match made in heaven. So I got a job as a parts and service district manager calling on Dodge, Jeep, and Chrysler dealers in Northern California. Now, I had taken about a year off from racing at this point, but I talked to anybody who would listen. And I finally talked to one of the dealers that I worked for, Mar Dodge, in Oroville, California. And the dealer principal said, we think this rally thing might be something that would help promote our products, and so we'd be interested in doing that with you. And the dealer's son, Craig Marr, thought that he would like to be a co-driver. And so I got the opportunity then to begin racing a car for Mar Dodge, a Dodge Colt, in what was called at that time the California Rally Series. So it was a great opportunity for me, and I enjoyed working in the dealerships, learning more about dealership operations. And as luck would have it, or a God thing, Chrysler put together a special program for select members of their field force to be able to come back to the University of Michigan and earn an MBA. And thankfully, I was selected for that program. You remember Charlie Tutt? You remember Charlie Tutt put me on academic probation? The only reason my grade point average was high enough for me to get into the University of Michigan Graduate School was because Charlie Tutt had put me on academic probation and kept my grade point average up. That's a God thing. And that's what the mentors do for us as we go through our lives. So I had the opportunity to come back and earn my, hold on.
It wasn't my fault. Nancy was talking to me. She
Is that where you've been, sweetheart?
And you can appreciate how wonderful an experience and what an opportunity that was. When I finished that program, Chrysler brought me back to Centerline to be the marketing and advertising manager for what was called Direct Connection, which was their performance parts and service organization. And this led to just a wonderful period for me. Ann likes to say it was 14 years of vroom, vroom, vroom. Because it gave me the next 14 years to have a factory-sponsored ride from a number of the Chrysler divisions, and it was a wonderful relationship. Now I'm going to ask you, if you will, to fast forward with me now to 1982, and we're going to be going to the Pikes Peak Auto Hill Climb. 1982, the Pikes Peak Auto Hill Climb was added to the Rally Series, and it was the first time that I'd ever had a chance to do the event. I knew the event was well known internationally, and so I was a little nervous about this because it was a little more exposure than myself and my sponsors had had. It was the first time Chrysler had participated in a number of years. And so we did all the paperwork, sent in all our information, and I walk up to the registration desk. There's a gentleman sitting there, and I hand my paperwork over, and he looks at the paperwork, and he looks up at me, and he says, "So you're John Crawford, huh?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "You went to GMI, didn't you?" I said, "Yes, sir." He says, "I understand you can be a bit of a problem." And I thought, of course, I'm, my eyes are as big as saucers, and I'm thinking, well, sir, the check cleared, we filled the paperwork out correctly, right? And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Everything's fine." He said, "Do you know who I am?" And I said, "Yes, sir, you're the organizer of the event." And he says, "No, I'm Charlie Tett III. And his dad was by then retired. And this is Charlie and I at the hill climb. Charlie had then retired, knew that I was interested in racing, saw the entry list for the event, and told his son, Charlie Jr., to bust my chops. So that's why you always want to be nice to everyone, because you never quite know when it might come back to get you. So we had excellent success at the Pikes Peak Auto Hill Climb. One of the most interesting cars that I had the opportunity to drive was the Lamborghini LM002. Chrysler owned Lamborghini for a while. And at that period, Lamborghini did not have an outstanding reputation for durability. As a matter of fact, one of the jokes was if you owned a Lamborghini, you needed three: one to drive, one to be in the shop, and one for parts. So with that kind of background, I'm sitting at the start line, and the president of Lamborghini USA rolls down the window and says, "Good luck. By the way, if anything happens to the car, crash it." Because they didn't want anyone to think that the car was unreliable. And as he rolled up the window, I thought, that's easy for you to say. You're not going up to 14,000 feet. But the car did extremely well. We won our class, and it was just an interesting opportunity. So we had great success with the Pikes Peak Hill Climb. And then I'd like to share just a couple of more stories from my rally experiences. As I told you, my grandmother, or my mother's father, built Indianapolis cars. My mother loved speed. This is a picture of my mother after having had the opportunity to ride with me in one of the rally cars. You notice she's all helmeted up. And we got done, and I said, "Well, Mother, what'd you think?" She said, "I closed my eyes." And I said, I appreciate that. And when you ladies come and look at the pictures, you gentlemen won't necessarily appreciate this. My mother has her purse. So she's sitting strapped into a 6-point harness with a helmet and intercoms on and her purse in her lap. And I'm thinking to myself, maybe we pass a Walmart on the dirt road at 70 miles an hour? You never know. Maybe I'd need a Kleenex. So, but it was wonderful to have my mother have that opportunity. And this is a story that I didn't have particularly planned to tell, but we would do press stages. We would do stages before events, high-speed sections for video photographers. And my dad was riding with me in one of these high-speed sections for video, and I didn't think anything about it until B.F. Goodrich, one of our sponsors, came out with a full-size poster that went to every B.F. Goodrich store in the United States, and the picture of our car, because we were one of the cars they sponsored, that was on that poster was a picture taken when my dad was in the car with me.
Oh my goodness.
And so I always told my dad, if anybody ever asks, you can tell them that you've been in a famous poster. So we had great experiences. And I'd like to now talk about the second crash, as Ann would say. This is church, so I can't lie. I may have had more than two. But for this presentation, we're just going to talk about the second one. We are in Pennsylvania, in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania. We come doing fairly well. We are going fairly quickly. We come to a hard right-hand corner, and as we say in racing, I ran out of talent just before we ran out of road. And so we go rolling down about 3.5 rolls. We end up on our side. And as I told you, we go, you okay? Yeah, you okay? Joe, you okay? Yeah, you okay? And then I hear my co-driver say, hey, Betty Ann, what are you doing here? And I thought, oh my goodness, he's had a stroke. Or he's hit his something. I said, Joe, it'll be okay. I was on the upside. We happened to just have a picture of the two cars kissing here. So I got out, and as I stick my head out of the door to crawl out of the car, there stands Betty Ann Gilliland, one of our fellow competitors, and her husband Dan.
Oh, my word. He was okay.
He was okay. He hadn't had a stroke. He was talking to Betty Ann.
Yes, he was.
Well, lo and behold, they had rolled off the same corner before we had. We rolled down on top of them, and by the time the event was over, there was 4 of us stacked up like cordwood.
4 cars?
4 cars.
Oh,
So, just so you know, I wasn't the only one that didn't have enough talent to make it around that corner.
and you weren't the first.
And I wasn't the first. Thank you, Marcy. I'll remember that. So, we've got the photo of the 2 cars together. This is the car after the crash. And Ann looked at it yesterday and she said, well, that doesn't look too bad. And it doesn't until you realize that the body was shaped like this. So we ended up having to scrap that car. That car was rebuilt into this, and it's the car we won the 1986 championship with.
Oh my God.
So even after running out of talent, not first, thank you, Marcy, we were able to come back to score enough points to win the national championship. But as Ann said, this is kind of rolling away from rallying, you know, literally. So then we had a little transition as I was thinking about kind of next careers. And a friend of mine had a stunt team in California. And he said, hey, you've got some driving experience, you know about cars. How'd you like to join our stunt team?
Oh, my.
I said, well, that sounds like fun. And so one of the things that I learned with my period doing stunts is that what you see in the movies and TV doesn't just happen. You actually practice. You practice crashing. You practice a number of things. One of the things that we learned to practice. Thank you, dear. Is we learn how to do burns. And this is me doing an arm burn.
Oh, gee.
And after that, we did full burns, where you're set on fire. So when you see the guy in the movie that's falling out of the building and he's on fire, that could be one of my buddies. This is another thing that I didn't mention when Ann and I were going over this, but when you do this, you get what's called an adjustment. They pay you more to set yourself on fire. So all of us were lining up, pick me, pick me. So we did, we had the opportunity to do movies, we had the opportunity to do commercials. And if I can, well, I'll carry this up front and then bring it back. Do any of you remember an advertising campaign called This Isn't Your Father's Oldsmobile? A number of years ago. Well, this advertisement was done for This Is Not Your Father's Oldsmobile. It was based on Mission Impossible theme. And obviously the person in the Oldsmobile had gotten the secret papers and they had to run away from the enemy across the bridge to get into the new country and save the world. Well, I was in a Jeep who was chasing the Oldsmobile, and you'll notice the kind of large explosion here. That was supposed to be the bridge blowing up right after we got across it. Either I was a little slower than I was supposed to be, which I find extremely hard to believe, or my pyrotechnics guy got an itch a little early. But this is the flag that was flying on the back of the Jeep I was driving. So it'll give you a little feel for how close we got to, well, you know.
The guy thing too.
Yes, that was definitely a God thing. And we also had the opportunity to do some movies. And there's a couple of things here that are rather humorous, and one that I'm very, very proud of. And I'll tell the humorous one first. You'll notice that I am here being held at gunpoint. Ann had the opportunity to go with me on one of my movie sets, and we were all shooting AK-47s. And I gave Ann one of the empty blank casings, just, kind of as a memento. And she carried it in her purse for years. Well, after 9/11, she's going through security at the airport. Her bag goes through the airport detector, and the guy goes, "Who belongs to this bag?" Needless to say, she doesn't have that AK-47 shell anymore. But you will notice, as I said, that I'm being held at gunpoint. Not too long after this scene was shot, that nice lady with the shotgun shot me and killed me.
Oh, okay.
And then I played one of my most famous roles. I was a cadaver double. Because the way the script was written, there was going to be an explosion in the lab, and the cadaver table would fall over, and the cadaver would stand up. Well, you couldn't use, well, I guess you could have had a dummy do it, because I did it, but you'd have had to do an animatronic dummy when they got to stand up. So on my Screen Actors Guild resume is a line that says, cadaver double. I'm sorry. Yes, Philadelphia. That one was Philadelphia Experiment 2. All of the nominations we had we're waiting for. Oh, and one of the other ones that I was in, if you want to look this one up, is Killer Tomatoes Go to France. I also was in one of the Terminator movies, and I was in another one that was fairly well known called Crazy People, and I was in Ladies in White. So there were some legitimate movies in there as well. Huh?
Killer tomatoes, you still get checks.
Really?
Yeah, I still get checked. I got $4.69 in residuals last year. And they take taxes out. So I was able to continue to do a little bit of that. But then, as Ann said, kind of living the unexpected dream, Motor City to the rescue. With my background in dealership operations and with the racing background and the fact that I knew cars, I had the opportunity to work for Ford in a group called WEO, World Export Operations. Some of you may remember when Jack Nasser, I know Keith does, when Jack Nasser was the president of Ford, he said, anywhere someone wants to buy a Ford automobile around the world, we'll have a dealership for them. And a part of my job in those markets was to go train the dealers on how to work with the Ford Motor Company. And one of those jobs was in Moscow. And I want to tell you how you buy a car in Moscow. I walked into the dealership, and it's a spectacular building. They've got a restaurant, blue Italian tile floors in the service department. Beautiful hardwood floors in the showroom area, and in the showroom area, which is probably the size of Calvin Hall, there's one car in the middle of the showroom floor. And there's a door right over there with 3 steps up to it and a desk next to it. Now, a door with a desk isn't unusual in a dealership, right? The guy sitting in the chair next to the desk with the AK-47 was a little unusual. Because during this period, they didn't have a great banking system in Russia. And for any of you who watch some of the shows like Breaking Bad, buying a car in Russia was very much like a drug deal in the United States. The customer would walk in with a briefcase. They'd show the briefcase to the gentleman with the AK-47. He'd take them up the 3 steps. They'd do all of their paperwork, He would come down into the service department, pick up his car, and drive away. I tried to talk to dealers in the U.S. about that. I thought the AK-47 was a great negotiating tool. For some reason, the manufacturers weren't real happy with that, but I thought it was a good idea.
I can't imagine why.
Right, just a little persuasion. I'm sorry, you want how much for your used car? Another opportunity that I had was in Morocco. Again, I was at a Ford dealer who also sold Alice Chalmers tractors. It was a beautiful three-story warehouse building. And the day I walked in, I had to go to the third floor. That's where the executive offices were. And I go up to the third floor of the dealer. And over in one corner, probably the size of the two alcoves, is roped off. And there's a bar, and there's artwork on the wall, and there's pictures, and there's plaques. And I asked the dealer, I said, that seems unusual. What's that? And he said, when Patton was doing the North Africa campaign, this was his headquarters, and they still had preserved the bar and all of the art that was in that bar. And it was the guys who had done art on the tanks and nose art on the planes had decorated all the walls.
Wow.
And that was a really, really cool experience. And kind of my last experience in working for World Export Operations was in Zimbabwe. And I was working with a Mercedes and Ford dealer in Harare, the capital of Zimbabwe. And we were sitting in his office, and at this period I was trying to talk to dealers, international dealers, about Ford standards. How do we do customer service? How do we take care of the customer? And the dealer said to me, he said, one of my top technicians lives in a hut with a grass floor, cooks his meals over an outside fire, takes a bus an hour to and from work. How do I explain to him that a handprint on the seat of a Mercedes is a big deal? I didn't have an answer. So you get a feel for the differences in culture that I was able to see as I had this tremendously unexpected dream, another God thing, to travel all over the world doing training for both Ford, and I'll talk a little bit about Chrysler in a minute. But once again, another one of the unique experiences that I had when I was in Zimbabwe. Well, if you look up here closely, you'll see someplace there's an elephant goosing me. Or as I finally said to Ann, an elephant touched my butt. Because when you're married, you have to admit those things when people touch you inappropriately. So we had the opportunity then also to work quite a bit domestically. Ann and I worked together for a number of years on a program called Jeep 101. And Jeep 101 was really a cool event in that it set up off-road courses and gave consumers the opportunity to come and drive Jeep vehicles. We talked about the technology. They had the opportunity to ask us questions. And so it was a really good experience for our customers. Now, is there anyone in here who has ever worn golf socks and gotten a tan? Well, all these events were done outside, right? And so we had a nice tan, and we normally wore tennis shoes or something. And so one day Ann decides to wear sandals. And so we get all done with the presentation. Ann says, is there any question? Gentleman raises his hand in the back, and Ann said, yes, sir. He said, yes, ma'am, where can I get a pair of socks like that? So oddly, we were called on from time to time to respond to interesting customer requests. Now, the Jeep 101 program led to a program called Camp Jeep in the U.S., and that was done in a number of different locations, and that was a 3-day event for Jeep owners. It was done in Vail, Colorado. It was done in Virginia, and while it was great fun for the clients. For those of us who worked it, we got there a week early. We were on site from 7 to 10 every day. And Ann and I did orientations and presentations twice an hour for 8 hours. So that part of the dream was truly unexpected. But it was a great experience. And that led to what they called Euro Camp Jeep, or Euro Camp Jeep, which was basically then done for all the countries in Europe. And I had the opportunity to work on that program as well. And that led to truly one of the unexpected God things. We were at a place called Las Comes. It was a huge kind of desert-oriented facility in Spain, outside of Barcelona. And the house, I forget who I was talking to, the house had been occupied constantly since 1300. So it was really neat. And we, the crew there, we stayed at a castle, at a refurbished castle. And I got to speaking with the owner of the castle, and we talked about our religious faiths, and we talked about our beliefs, and he had a number of unique clocks, and I'm a big clock fan. And throughout the facility, there were a number of locked cabinets. And I asked him one time, I said, is that where you keep your linens or what? And he said, well, no. He said, we have some pretty unique books and articles. And in Spain, you can be taxed on your belongings. And so we just don't talk about them. We just don't tell people about them. And I said, oh, well, that's interesting. And he said, yeah. He said, we've got some stuff from the Spanish Inquisition. And I thought, oh, well, that's pretty neat. Yeah. So about 2 days before we were to leave, they invited me to join the family for the evening meal, which was really wonderful for me. And he said, based on the conversations we've had, and I apologize, I'm going to add one caveat. This castle had its own church that they used to do back in the day. If you were wealthy, you had your own church on the site of your home. So they were obviously a very religious family. And we're sitting at dinner, and he said, I'd like for you to come with me. And I went with him, and he opened one of the books, and he said, this is one of the things that we never talk about. This is a Gutenberg Bible.
Wow.
And so I had the opportunity to see not only some documents from the Spanish Inquisition, but a true Gutenberg Bible. And that, there's no question that was truly a God thing. And of course, not only did we do the Jeep events, but we also had the opportunity to do a number of new vehicle launch programs in the United States. Ann and I worked together on those. And we also had the chance to do some in Europe. This is on the island of Ibiza. When you see this view, this was spectacular. And so we had the event set up all over the island. And for any of you who have spent any time in Europe, the roads are about this big. And the island of Ibiza is about this big. And we had 50 Jeep Grand Cherokees on this island. So we have everything set up. We have facilities all over the island, tents set up for training. And we're eating breakfast the morning that the first group from across Europe is supposed to join us. We had a week of events all over for trainers all over Europe. They show up. We think, great, we're eating breakfast. Our logistics crew spoke some English, but not a lot. Their leader, who spoke fairly good English, comes up and we see them whispering, and he comes over to Ann and I and gives it the thing you hate to see, give me the room. And he said, we had a storm on the other side of the island. It blew down all our tents and blew part of our chairs into the Mediterranean. Can you guys do the training? We said, you betcha. You got flip charts? Yeah, we got flip charts. You got markers? Yeah, we got markers. Bring them, bring the people. We'll do it all on the flip charts and markers. So we ended up doing that first international training program on flip charts and markers as our chairs were on their way over to Barcelona. And we stayed up all night, reset the site, and the rest of the event went extremely well. And kind of a domestic story, I think you will kind of appreciate this because this gets to be nice to everyone. I was doing a Dakota launch program in the Black Hills. And the programs that we did, the retail salespeople were required to come to the programs to get credit because they would then be allowed to get spiffs or additional income from the factory for attending the training. And this program went from 8 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. And about 1 o'clock, I see a truck pull in. And one of the people that worked on the crew comes over and says, "John, I've got 3 salespeople that just showed up." And I said, "Okay, send them over." So the guy comes over and he says, "Yeah," he says, "I'm really sorry we're late. We just want to do the event." And I said, "Well, the event started at 8 o'clock. We've got another event tomorrow. You can come and get credit." And he said, "We really just kind of want to drive the trucks." And I said, "Well, the problem is you have to sign the waiver or I can't let you drive the trucks." And pardon my French, the guy says, "Well, you're a bit of a prick, aren't you?" And I said, "Well, that may be the case, but I apologize. There's nothing I can do for you. If you come back tomorrow morning, you'll be able to get credit for the training." So I see these 3 guys go off. And a couple minutes later, the guy comes back and he says, "Listen," he says, "we drove an hour and a half. Isn't there something we can work out?" And I looked him right in the eye and I said, "I'm going to make a suggestion to you." I said, "Moving forward, if you want to work something out with somebody, I wouldn't lead with the 'you're a prick' thing." So that gets it back exactly back to always be nice to everyone. And then, as Ann said, next is now. Hello, my name's John Crawford. I'd like to welcome you to Lunch and Learn. Thank you very much.